Welcome, Meredith. It's so great to have you.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me today.
I'm so excited. I was introduced to you by Gina, someone I know very well from the Westfield Coalition for Mental Health, our fearless leader, one of them. I was thrilled that she thought enough to introduce me to you for this series, Michelle's Conversations That Matter, because I think the topic, as she did, is so important when we think about how do we want to help people understand mental health and in general just get more comfortable with these kinds of topics. So I was thrilled that she said that I needed to meet you, and I'm thrilled for our conversation. We're going to talk about understanding trauma more. But before we dive in, a little bit about the series. So the series is designed to help educate, empower, and have conversations that maybe are a little bit uncomfortable for people. I'm out to be a conversation starter in the world outside of my company, which is Trifecta Mental Health, where I'm trying to really make a difference in companies and with educators and beyond to help there be more compassion in workplaces and understanding and resilience around mental health. But it all starts with conversation. So I'm super grateful that you're here. Could you take a moment to just let folks know where you live, a little bit about you, and what you do in your practice?
Sure. My name's Meredith Strauss, and my practice is located in Short Hills, New Jersey. It's called Light Street Psychotherapy, and we do specialize in trauma at my practice. We have 5 therapists in the practice that all use different modalities to approach trauma. And yeah, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also a yoga teacher, so I use some of those skills in my work as well. And we started the practice in 2014, and we recently moved to a new beautiful office right before COVID that no one can work in, but we're there a couple of days a week. We kind of field ourselves in there when we can. And, it's just a really exciting time for our practice in terms of expanding and just trying to get our message out to as many people and help as many people as we can.
I love it. I love it. So tell us why, maybe there's a backstory I don't know about you, but tell us why helping trauma patients is so important to you.
Well, actually, Michelle, trauma found me. I didn't really know that it was going to be important to me. It's kind of something that showed up for me in my practice. I started getting clients that had a lot of trauma, and I realized that my graduate school training didn't really prepare me for that so well. So I did go back and get training in something initially called EMDR, which is an approach to trauma, which eventually led me further into my trauma training. Just as a therapist, to get more education, I realized that with trauma comes something called disassociation, where patients will dissociate from their feelings. And I didn't have the tools to handle that either. And I found this modality called internal family systems, which eventually became my primary modality of treating patients with trauma. But I found that it found me, and that I was able to really hold space for people in a way that I saw was helping them. And it became my passion by accident, but really by something bigger than myself.
That's amazing. I mean, that's amazing. So let's go back to basics, because unless I think you have experienced a traumatic experience in your life and you have managed it or dealt with it, I don't know that it's crystal clear to everyone what is trauma by definition, and how would we know how would we know that we have had a traumatic experience?
Well, I think trauma differs for people. Like one person might experience an event that they find traumatic, and another person might experience that same event and not find it traumatic. So trauma is defined as the psychological or emotional response to an event that is deeply distressing or disturbing to somebody. So for instance, if there's a fire at my workplace and I get out and I'm safe, And I'm like, oh, okay, I got out of that. Some people might not find that traumatic, whereas another person might decide that they can't work anymore. They can't go back into the building. It was too distressing, and they have a severe traumatic response. So depending, and a lot of it depends on your upbringing, right? On what you experienced in your childhood that prepares you for traumatic events. So it could, some trauma can be something like a car accident, having an illness, the death of a loved one, a divorce, or something more extreme, like, because some people don't see those things as traumatic, right?
No, yeah.
Or it could be something that people do associate with trauma, which is like a natural disaster, being at war, being physically or sexually abused. Those kinds of things really target trauma. But there are other events that I think are really traumatic to people as well. So it's really anything that overwhelms your capacity to cope and leaves you with a feeling of hopelessness or feeling out of control or not able to respond or feeling unsafe.
Yeah, so I think that the common person would think that trauma is only the extreme, and what you're saying is it can be anything that literally prevents you from moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like even having a special needs child that you didn't expect to have could be traumatic for you because, you know, it's not the life that you thought that you might have, and then you have difficulty coping with that, and as a result of that, that could be traumatic for you.
So, I guess it's very interesting. I teach a resilience program to educators and to my corporate clients. And one of the things I try to remind people, especially now during the pandemic, is to give yourself grace and to recognize we're living through a pandemic, and to recognize that I'm so sick of people saying we're all in the same boat. We're all in the pandemic boat. But we're so not. And you just spoke to that by saying, we're more all in the same ocean, and our boats are very, very different based on our childhood, based on our past experiences. Because what you just said was trauma is different for that person than it is for you based on your history, right?
Yeah, I think this pandemic's going to speak a lot to a lot of trauma because, you know, people are stuck in their homes and maybe abusive situations that they're not in on a daily basis. And, you know, there's people that lost their jobs. There's people that didn't lose their jobs. Everybody is responding to it in their own way. And it's really important to be present with people to honor whatever they're going through.
So how do we unpack this, Meredith? When I think of trauma and I think of, my friends and family who have navigated and worked through past traumas, it's because it's come to surface through another experience. But how do we know if we're pressure cookers and we have something brewing beneath the surface that we haven't addressed? Like, how do we know if we have some type of hidden trauma, and what do we do about it? Or do you just wait and see?
Well, the first thing is to just really be mindful of what your experience is like and start to notice your emotional reactions and your physical reactions because, you know, the body, there's a famous trauma specialist named Bessel van der Kolk who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And the body does really hold on to traumatic memories. Our bodies are like a computer where traumatic memories are stored in different places. So if you're having migraine headaches, if you're having backaches, if you're having stomach aches that don't seem to have any medical reason behind them, if there's, a change in your sleep patterns, in your appetite, you're not interested in sex anymore, like start to notice some of the physical things that are going on for you and be curious about that. Like, could this be related to something else that is kind of out of my awareness? And can I be curious about that? Also, just your emotional reactions. Do you have a sense that you're always anxious, that you're always on guard, that the world doesn't seem like a safe place to you, that you're constantly worrying and ruminating about the same subjects all the time? If you're waking up with nightmares in the middle of the night all the time or flashbacks, these are common responses to trauma, and it could just help to sit with a therapist and even 1 or 2 sessions if you're questioning, like, what's going on with me, to just be curious with a therapist and talk it through might help you get a little bit more understanding of what's happening.
I love that. And, and my whole goal with the series and the work that I do is to get people comfortable that it's totally okay. I'm trying to make mental health cool, that it's totally okay to pick up the phone and sit with a therapist for a couple of sessions just to see what's available to you. If it's something that can help you.
I also think you have to notice your behaviors. Like if there's a excessive drinking or you're using marijuana to cope, like usually these kinds of behaviors are what we call in internal family system firefighters that want to put out a fire of something that's going on underneath the surface for a different part of us that might be experiencing some trauma. So if there are some behaviors that you struggle with also, we really normalize those. We look at those as parts of us that have learned ways to cope with something that's really uncomfortable. So we don't want to pathologize the fact that, you're drinking every night. We kind of want to look at what's the underlying cause of that, what might be triggering you to need to cope in that way, rather than making it such a bad thing.
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. And that was going to be my next question. Like, are we all experiencing trauma in this pandemic?
I think to a degree we are. It's really having to cope with a way of life that we had no preparation to prepare for, and we're kind of going one step at a time, figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
And the kids are home and online, and everybody's online all the time, and that zaps our brain, being online all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that the consequences of this are still really unknown.
I know. And, yeah, I mean, people are saying we're going to come out of this. There's going to be a lot of PTSD, because it's not normal to be isolated from people that you love. It's not normal to not be able to go to a funeral of a loved one that passed away. It's not normal to have unemployment and financial strain and marriages imploding. It's so multifaceted. I think you're right. We're going to not know for a little while what the true impact of this is.
Yeah, that's why I think self-care practices are really important for people right now, to just really connect with how can you help calm your own nervous system? Are there things out there that you can do? What helps you, if it's exercise or if it's reading a book, meditation, doing yoga, really connecting with a friend online, whatever it is that you have as a self-practice, a self-care practice is really important right now.
Can you share with us, without names, a success story of someone that you worked with who was navigating trauma? I would love to hear, like, what comes to mind with how you helped someone. I want people to know what's accessible to them if they are dealing with something, and what care can do for them.
Well, I'm just going to speak to the internal family systems model, because that's what is really my passion, and what I really found is the most helpful way to help people cope with their trauma. As I said before, it's a non-pathologizing way to look at trauma. So we really look at a person and we break down that we're all made of a lot of different parts of us. And you hear people say all the time, like, there's a part of me that feels like this, and there's a part of me that feels like that. It's very normal to have parts of our personality, and they develop it. Some of them develop at very young ages, these parts, and they stay young. Some develop in adolescence and they stay young. And then we have these manager parts, we have these protector parts, we have these firefighter parts. So that all kind of help these younger parts that have experienced trauma in childhood, if we have childhood trauma, that protect that younger part of them that they don't really want to look at. So that's why when you say, how do you know you have trauma? Sometimes it is out of our awareness, because our protector parts will protect us from really seeing that. But those parts can get triggered, and they start kind of like knocking at the door, and the protectors go, oh, no. Like, the drinker will drink, or whatever will happen. No, we don't want to see that. So with the internal family systems model, we really start to break down the different parts, and we start to help our clients develop what we call a self to part relationship. Because there's a part of us inside that we call self that's very calm and very curious and very open hearted and compassionate. And we all are born with that. We all have that, but we just forget that we have it.
Mm.
So with IFS, we teach our clients how to learn to be in that space of self and get to know their parts from a curious perspective and find out what is it that this part is trying to do to help me. Because even the negative parts of us have a positive intention for us in some way. They're trying to help us not feel the pain.
Yeah.
And so once we get to know what those positive intentions are, they don't have to work so hard.
Right.
And they start to trust that we have this self-like energy that can really be helpful to them.
Yeah.
That's why these practices of meditation and yoga and breathing and just learning these things, it sounds hokey pokey sometimes, right? But it's very helpful to be able to get into a calm space so that we can be curious with our experience.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. I think what we tend to do, like you said before, is we look at the topical actions of our loved ones and say they are gravitating to this. Look, they have this is the problem, but you're not really getting curious as to what the source of that is. So that leads me to my next question. How should we support a loved one if we suspect they have something that they're dealing with and they're dealing with it in an unhealthy way? Like, for example, a partner who maybe at one point divulged some horrible past experience, and then you see them and they're now doing things where you're like, this doesn't seem right. How do we support them? How do we help them?
I mean, I would say first and foremost, try to get them a therapist. It's really hard to do this stuff on your own.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to support somebody who's experiencing trauma because they're in a fight, flight, freeze response pretty much all the time. So they're walking around feeling anxious and unsafe and hypervigilant to the world. And if they're in that part of them, it's very difficult to reach them because they see the world through that lens. So loved ones can be very frustrating because they don't validate that experience and they don't understand that. Well, just calm down, like it's okay, and they're not curious about the experience, right?
Yeah.
So number one would be to notice if you're being judgmental at all.
Mm-hmm.
Notice if you have an agenda.
Mm.
Because even having an agenda will cause somebody to put up a defensive part of them. Like, don't tell me what to do. I know what to do. You don't know what's best for me. I know what's best for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's understandable that if we have an agenda, our parts are going to react to that agenda.
Right.
So I use the acronym ABC, always be curious. If we can be curious about someone's experience, like I'm noticing that you're seeming really anxious right now. What's going on? Is there something that I could do? To just be curious with that person will help that part to calm down because that part feels seen.
Yeah.
That part feels heard. That part feels validated. And when we've experienced trauma, a lot of our parts don't feel that way.
Right. Right. That's great. So good. I'm going to invite people who might be watching, if they have any questions. We're going to take a few questions. We're not going to go very long. So please pop your questions in the comment. We'll be happy to answer them. So tell us, Meredith, what are you up to? I know your practice is in Short Hills, and I know you're up to some making your services more accessible to people. Tell us about what you're working on.
Yeah, so what we're working on now is we have as I said before, we have 5 different therapists in the practice, and we all come from different modalities. So we're talking about the integration of these different modalities to provide our clients with a smorgasbord of options. We really want to give a buffet that people can choose from and say, IFS doesn't really work for me, but the dialectical behavioral therapy that Gina and my practice, who we were talking about earlier, does, that really resonates a little bit more with me. So we're looking to create a webinar for our clients that they can utilize outside of therapy that incorporates these alternative approaches to healing trauma and giving them an opportunity to choose what works for them.
Awesome.
We also really want to do more groups in the practice, but right now, because of COVID, that's really difficult
Yeah,
to do,
it's
because
hard.
the online groups, although they can be very powerful and very good, there's something about holding space for people live that experience trauma that's very soothing and helpful to our clients. Just to be in tune with each other's energy.
So great. So great. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. How do people get in touch with you? Your website is at the bottom of the ticker here, but is there any other way people can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
We do have a Facebook page also, Light Street Psychotherapy. The best way to reach us is our website that has the most information. I'm not the greatest at updating my Facebook page. I'm not a big social media person. I don't have an Instagram page or a Twitter or anything like that. But
wait, before we go, what do you do to take care of you? I know you're a yoga instructor, but what do you do to take care of you?
So what I do to take care of me is I definitely have a lot of self-care practices. I am a meditator, so I meditate every day. I incorporate the internal family systems model into my daily life. So I meditate with my parts. I'm curious about what parts of me are coming up. I work with those parts. I speak for those parts. I really do a lot of that. I do practice yoga at least 2, maybe 3 times a week, if possible. I take my dog for a walk. I love to do that. Spending time with my family, cooking with my family. I really try to make time to have a good work-life balance, because I do tend to be a little bit of I have an overachieving part that, works a lot and takes on way too many clients. So I try to have a work-life balance where I can do both.
That's amazing. That's great. Yeah, it's always good to know what the teacher does for themselves. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Michelle.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to staying connected to you. And I'm so grateful Gina introduced us, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.